Hey everyone, welcome to the Sad Boy Sessions, Emotional Identity in Christ. My name is Connor.
And my name is Matt.
And my name is Jeff.
And basically the idea behind this is that we are self-proclaimed sad boys.
Wing sadder.
Which basically means that we're, I don't know, should we go into the whole thing with the 3D?
Everyone loves a good Venn diagram, and you know what? There's three of us here. It's
okay.
Perfect. It's destiny.
I mean, do you want to explain it? You're hiding your face.
It's probably better for the listeners. So my fiance or fiance, as you will, they created something in college called, I don't even know what it's really called, just a Venn diagram to kind of classify people. And there's one for guys and then there's one for girls. The guys, there's three of them. There is the real estate boy who likes nice things, is really good at small talk. Then you got a sporty boy who is probably like in your Chacos, just very active. Everything you would think with the sporty boy. And then there's the sad boy or the e-boy, whatever you want to call it. And that's us. And we are a little more in touch with our emotions, or emotional IQ is a little bit higher, as you will. It sounds a little better, right? We like music. Anime is what one of the things said, and
that's news to me. I guess I'd sort of like it. Depends on the anime. But so Matt, Jeff, and I, we have this sad boy identity in common, and we thought it would be, I would think, beneficial to, I don't know. Basically, we want to help everyone who's listening to sort of get more in tune with their emotions if they're not already. And particularly if you are a believer in Jesus, to sort of wrap those emotions in the sort of blanket of Christ and see, like, historically over our lives, over short-term and long-term of our lives, what specific emotions, how they have manifested themselves in our lives. And then if it is a negative emotion, we want to sort of offer hope at the end of these episodes and say, kind of, point everyone back to Scripture and, I don't know, just sort of something of that nature. So I think the first emotion that we really want to get into is
the namesake.
Our namesake, sadness. So let me ask you, Matt.
Sorry, I feel like we are, what is the movie called? The Pixar movie?
Inside Out?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Like sadness and joy.
Uh-huh.
Sorry, but yeah, ask away.
So, Matt, let me ask you, think back over the past 2 or 3 weeks or so. How has sadness manifested itself in your life? If at all?
Yeah, honestly, I feel like a lot of transitions, the ending of things, with me being, who knows, almost 2.5 weeks out from getting married. Yeah. Lots of things ending, from everything I've ever known in life. in the sense, it sounded terrible, but in the sense of like, I've only known guy roommates, and I no longer will ever have, until hopefully, God willing, kids. But until he grows up. But yeah, just the ending of things into the beginning. And honestly, I feel like the last few weeks have been really busy, that I haven't spent a lot of time. I'm a big Sabbath guy. And shout out to EHS, one of the things they kind of suggest in that, and that's emotionally healthy spirituality, by the way. Big fan. if you want it, let me know. I'd be happy to buy it for you. Wonderful book. But one of the things they talk about in practice is working out your emotional muscles. It's hard to identify things when you aren't regularly working them out. So on Sabbaths, kind of like spending time to process what's really going on in life. And I feel like I haven't really done that of recently, just with crazy busy life. But I know that it's the pull and tug there with the transition of things, and it'll catch at one point sooner or later.
So over the past couple of weeks, the sadness has been primarily because life as you've known it up to this point is coming to an end.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not to be dramatic.
But there is light at the end of that
Yeah,
tunnel
and that's where
embarking on in marriage.
Yeah, and that's where the bittersweet, I think, is with it, is like there are a lot of beautiful and wonderful things that are, I'm not even sure what's on the other side of that door. Is Jeff is a newly married.
Drinks from an ox horn.
Yeah, and Jeff, yeah, there's lots of hope at the end of the tunnel, right?
In marriage? I would hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think specifically for you coming in to engagement, well, being in the season of engagement, yeah, there's a lot of transition there. And to kind of pick up where you're leaving off, I think when it comes to sadness, one thing that I think I've learned, and this could apply over the last couple of weeks, like Connor originally posed, or just thinking back in the seasons of my life, I think a lot of our emotions are caught up in seasons of change, seasons of transition, things coming, things going, the anxiety of the future, the lament of things that are passing. And so in reality, we kind of just it is very much integral to the human experience, not to get too deep too fast. But I think the beauty of doing a podcast like this is I don't want to say this in a weird way, but we're guys. Guys don't talk about their emotions openly as much traditionally. And two, I think it's important, it's not like we're coming into this with all the answers. It's just kind of a open box of, what have we experienced and what does that look like in each of our experiences. And so I would just, piggyback onto what you're saying, being in a season of engagement and me being out of that season into this season of being a newlywed, there still is anxiety about the future. I'd say when sadness pops up, it's I think for me, I'm struggling with the, now these new expectations of, okay, now that I'm a married man, what's next? It's you cross such a major threshold in your life, and with that comes increased responsibility. So there's some anxiety there and some self-doubt of do I measure up to this responsibility that I've taken on, and all kinds of things like that. So I think, when most people are dealing deeply with sadness in particular, usually it's in a time of, big change or big transition, I think can usually always be a trigger for those kinds of emotions. Even sometimes for things that are positive, like you're saying, in order to embrace what is new that is coming, there is a mourning of what is passing. So I definitely think there's two sides to that coin, and a lot of it is bound up in kind of expectation, and I think desires for certainty, and kind of hoping that things stay the same to some extent. So yeah, that would kind of be my 2 cents on that particular gateway.
So then, I guess for you, Jeff, over the past 2 or 3 weeks, or I guess a good starting point would be since you got married, how have you seen sadness manifest itself in your life?
Yeah, I think similar to what I said, it's kind of, I think dealing with expectation is always a deep root of sadness for me. And I think, in marriage, you come in with a lot of different expectations. Hopefully you've talked about a lot of them coming in. And I would say, thankfully Jen and I are off to a wonderful start in marriage, but like in that there's still things that, especially things that are outside your control. Like one of those things that has caused me great sadness is kind of like the housing market and how expensive it is to buy a house in Orlando right now. And I think, there's a common proverb, or basically people say comparison is the thief of joy. And, when I see friends like buying houses or like, renovating houses and kind of having a space to make their own, like Jen and I, of course, we're here in our living room. We've had a space to make our own. But I think there's just like in that longing, I've had moments of sadness of, man, I wish I could be at that stage, or I wish I could get to, this particular moment in time. But for our journey, we're just not there yet. And so I think the Lord's been gracious to me in allowing me to breathe and take a step back, and there's plenty to do between now and then, not to rush ahead and try to get there before we're ready. But and again, kind of the comparison is like I'm looking at friends that have been married for like 5 years, or 3 years, and have had a chance to, save their money and plan out and like do all these things that we just haven't. We've only been married 2 months, so I think there's just a lot of cautionary tales in my life of mindfulness and like why it's important to live in the present moment and not be too caught up in the things that have passed, and to not be too overly expectant for things that you're not even sure are coming in the future. So I think that's where it's cropped up for me kind of in the last couple months.
Okay. Well, this was, so then for the two of you, thinking about like one particular thing that has happened over the past couple of weeks that has brought you down, how did you, like, if you feel like expounding on what it specifically was, then that's great. It might give context to it. But when it happened, what did you do to remedy that sadness, if you did anything at all?
One thing I can think about, and I'm sure Jen wouldn't mind me sharing this because we are a newlywed couple, so obviously there's moments that you'll have where I would say, we don't really, bold in saying we don't fight a heck of a lot, but we definitely had kind of like in the past week this kind of distance or this kind of miscommunication, not being on the same page, which, I think sometimes coming into marriage, your false expectation is you're going to always be on the same page and you're going to continually always be growing closer and closer and closer and never have moments where you feel like you're drifting apart or not communicating well. And we definitely had a moment of kind of that miscommunication. And I think for me, it was, again, dealing with that unrealistic expectation of, oh, it's only ever going to be positive, easy growth, which I think anyone, whether you're in a marriage or any relationship or have friends for that matter, like there is like an ebb and a flow, and there are circumstances that will definitely exacerbate like things that are kind of lingering under the surface. And so we definitely had that kind of come up in the last week or so. And in the midst of that, I think we had a great chance to, like, the remedy to it was, as hard as it is, I think especially for guys, was vulnerability. Like, I think I immediately started to feel better, and we immediately started to mend the bridge when I was able to not be defensive and to be vulnerable and accept, like, what I was responsible for in the scenario. Like, to not blame her or just blame outside circumstances and be sad about it and be like, and basically feel like I'm a victim of what she's feeling or, the circumstances that are surrounding us. I basically had to kind of be vulnerable and accept, like, you're flawed. You've contributed to some of what's going on. Like, kind of set aside the pride of, oh, I'm doing everything perfectly and it's just not lining up, so I'm going to be, sad or angry about it. And I think as soon as I was able to be like, yeah, I do need to own up to that particular action. And, of course, I won't get into super specifics of, how we nitpick at each other. But that was the general theme of, how do I own up to my piece in this. and how do we clearly communicate and move forward in a positive way and not just yell at each other, which thankfully didn't happen. But yeah, I think that was kind of the remedy, was kind of clear communication, resetting those expectations in a realistic way, and then following through and being vulnerable and taking responsibility. That way it didn't kind of linger and fester and become something worse than it had to be.
Yeah, I would say so there's a few more things too that I was just thinking as Jeff was talking about, that have also added things I haven't fully processed but are still going on in the last couple weeks. Grandmother has had 2 hip surgeries, had a hip surgery, popped out of place twice since then, and her boyfriend has pancreatic cancer right now. So them trying to like take care of one another, and he just had like really severe surgery Wednesday of last week, or Thursday, and that's just kind of like, he was kind of given a time frame about a year ago that it could be anywhere from 4 months to a year. So it's supposed to be coming to the near the end. And I don't know, I was just kind of like hearing that, had lots of conversations, written letters to, and hearing that, and to actually put yourself in those shoes of like, wow, this could be, it was like they were saying it may or may not make it out of surgery. Thankfully he did come out and healthy, in a lot of pain, but he I don't know, just kind of going into a surgery, and it's like, wow, I may not wake up on the other side, or like here on this earth. And that's a very heavy thing. And I think a lot of the ways that I need to fully process sadness is to really allow myself to feel the depths of it and the weight of certain situations, or the weights of losses, the weights of, I guess more so loss. What is the definition of sadness? Just curious. Would you mind looking that up for a sec? I'm just curious. I was just thinking about that. But
Sure, Matthew. I will be dictionary.
Yeah. But yeah, just allowing myself to fully be kind of in something. And I think that allows me to be more healthy in other areas. That way it's, like you were saying, the lingering of that, and how it affects. And it does allow me to be fully, present in a moment,
All right, we're going to go with Wikipedia, because Google literally just says the condition or quality of being sad.
That's a good word.
Thanks, Google. That's really good. Wikipedia, which we all know is not an authoritative source, so don't quote this for your academic paper. It says sadness is an emotional pain associated with or characterized by feelings of disadvantage, loss, despair, grief, helplessness, disappointment, and sorrow. An individual experiencing sadness may become quiet or lethargic and withdraw themselves from others. Crying can be an indication of sadness.
Wow.
That's right on the money.
What I was just saying, yeah. That's crazy. And yes, that is a feeling. The detachment, the feelings of loss, yes. I was just curious of, like, do we only experience sadness is like only when we lose something? But it gave some other context for it, and that's why I was more so asking.
For sure.
Okay. Well, so I guess to answer my own question for myself. So over the past couple of weeks, there's been, I think, well, sort of, so you're engaged, you're married. Our friend and my current roommate, Nate, he and his girlfriend, Haley, just got engaged a week or so ago. Other roommate, JR, just started dating a couple weeks ago. And that's just like, it's just hard. Sometimes it's really hard for me to be happy for people when I know I should be. And over the past couple of weeks, there's just been a lot of like, oh, this person's advancing to this stage of the relationship or beginning a relationship, and just thinking of myself, it's like I've never been beyond a second date in my entire life, and that has always been really difficult for me because it makes me feed into a lot of lies that I'm aware that they're lies, but I buy into this idea that like I'm not good enough, I'm not attractive, I have a terrible personality, because from what I hear, personality overcomes looks in the mind of women, which
Certainly in my case.
and so it's like, well, to this stage of my life, it hasn't. So over the past couple of weeks, it's just been, thinking about that, kind of seeing all these relationships blossom, and it's just a feeling of loneliness and just kind of like bitterness. And to what you just read, the definition specifically with withdrawing oneself, like that, it's what I feel like I've been doing over the past couple of weeks, where I've had little to no desire to be around anyone, and I've just kind of wanted to be doing my own thing because I've wanted to sort of process that sadness and, to be honest, like wallow in it, and just because I get this like strange comfort of being sad, where I'm so used to this emotion constantly manifesting itself that I embrace it, but typically not in like a healthy way, not in like let me turn to the Lord and give him the sadness that's on my heart and have him take it away from me. It's like, no, I want to hold on to it, and I want to feel bitter, and I want people to notice that I'm not doing well, and then ask me how I'm doing, only for me to then say that I don't want to talk about it. And just sort of, I don't know, there's like that selfishness of like attention seeking when the sadness comes, of like, man, I hope someone asks me about this, but so that way I can just kind of like shrug them off and be like, well, this is how I'm feeling, and I want you to feel the same way. I want to bring you down. And it's like totally unhealthy, and I'm aware of that, and I don't know where that necessarily comes from. Maybe there's I'm the youngest of all my brothers, so, and by a lot too, by like several years. So I think growing up, it's always been like I kind of got what I wanted. But this is one thing I've never been able to get, is like a relationship, which is, and I know that I idolize this, and that's not what we're called to do as Christians. We're not supposed to put anything in front of God, and the idea is like, okay, well, you should be pursuing God, and the relationship will eventually come, but you shouldn't be pursuing the relationship and letting your relationship with God fall by the wayside. And so I think, to kind of go into the other part of this whole show that we're doing, is over the past year specifically, it's been a really tough year. And I think part of that is, well, I don't know how specific I want to get. But there was, well, if you know me, you'll probably know who I'm talking about. But there was someone I was very interested in earlier this year that I was fully convinced was interested in me. And then I kind of like put myself out there, only to find out that she only saw me as a friend. But there was like prior to me basically asking her out was like there was like watching movies together, holding hands, and that kind of thing, where it was just like that's so foreign to me, and because I've never had that, and so to have that sort of, and I haven't known her for years to know that like maybe that was just her personality and that's how she expresses herself around people she's comfortable with. But for me, like that sort of like physical affection, whether it was friendship or otherwise, like for me, because it never happens, I jumped to, oh, she likes me. And then that sort of built my hopes up. And then it was just totally shattered when I kind of asked her about it. And she was like, no, that's just it. I don't really think of you that way. And so that was hard. And that was back in like March or somewhere around then. So, and there was like, kind of like what you were talking about, Matt, like with Sad Boys listening to music and sort of turning to that as like a bloodletting of emotions of sorts, where it's like there were
Bloodletting.
yeah,
Visceral.
yes. So there was some, like The Weeknd had come out with an album, and there's this song called "Until I Bleed Out," which was on my top 5 of Spotify last year. And so it's like I sort of turned to that song because that song is specifically about not necessarily like not at all like killing yourself in terms of bleeding out like that, but it was like bleeding out that person from your life that you've held dear, that has sort of wronged you in some way, and to just bleed them out of your life, to like let them go in that regard. And so I kept turning to that song as opposed to turning to like worship music. And so it was just like I continued to embrace the dark elements of sadness, specifically over this past year, as opposed to turning to God. And that's all I have to say about that.
Whoa, I get a lot of questions
well,
here.
thanks for sharing, because that's like a very real
Mm-hmm.
thing. That's a real scenario. I feel like we could do a whole episode on dating and all the emotions that go into
Mm-hmm.
the idea of, especially romantic relationships. I think a lot of people probably like that is your highest highs and lowest lows in a lot of your life, especially as young people. So younger people, us in our mid to late 30s at this point. But I think that's incredibly vulnerable to be able to open up and say like, yeah, this really was a loss, even of something that maybe, like, I think in my own experience, like, I am obviously now married, but much of my 20s was very similar in the sense that I did not date a lot. If I did go on dates, it wasn't really a lot of like frequency. It wasn't like I wouldn't really say I ever had like an established relationship before the woman I married. So sometimes you just get lucky in that sense. But I think a lot of those emotions that you described around it, especially like the sad pieces, like it's true that you can get caught up in that, and especially when it's something that feels foreign, everything's heightened. You know, you're reading into so much of what the person says, what they don't say, what they mean when they, hug you for 5 seconds longer than they did before. And I definitely think that there's room to process those kinds of experiences, because even if it doesn't end in a relationship or like a official breakup, I think especially in our current dating culture, like, I mean, we have to deal with things like ghosting. Like, people are like, oh, hey, yeah, I would love to do this, that, and the other, and then they just drop off the face of the map. Like, I feel like we're in completely different territory than previous generations when it comes to dating and vulnerability. And that's what makes it hard. especially I think for our generation, is it seems like there's a billion options, and they can all disappear at a moment's notice. So, again, maybe more for another episode of the complexities of that, but
I would
definitely feel that.
I would be so about that. There's just a lot of nuances, and dating's a weird thing. It's not really spoken of
And
in
there's
the
no
Bible.
rules.
Yeah, it's not spoken on, and it's kind of left for interpretation. All this to say, we go back to arranged marriages. No, not really, but yeah, maybe another episode. There's a lot there, but yeah. Also, thank you for sharing. Want to verbalize that too. Question though is, I feel like context of this is like, so like as a child for me, I think back a lot of my sadness and how for the longest time I couldn't even tell the difference between anger and sadness, because it initially started out as sadness only to be channeled into anger. Do you feel like you end up being more angry or sad like in those moments? Like, can you tell the difference between the two? Or like how does that, do you channel one emotion to the next, or do you like fully be in it before moving on to the next piece of, like, I guess, grieving or whatever in that process?
I think there's some sort of blend of the two. Like, so I guess it depends on the context. So like when like my grandma passed away March of last year, and she basically raised me. So there was that sadness is discernibly different than a sadness of like, oh, this person broke up with you or told you that they don't like you or something like that. So so specifically when it comes to this, because like I wasn't angry when my grandma died. I was just sad and that kind of thing. But with this, there's I would say it's predominantly sadness, in that like I'm trying to figure out, why am I not good enough? And so I dwell on that, which then sort of brings about sadness. But there's anger, I would say, like buried deep down, that's for sure involved in that, of like what the F? Why does this keep happening? Why didn't she like me? Why did she play with my emotions? That kind of thing, where and part of it is like, okay, well, so the anger comes of like, okay, let's get into the context of it. So she ended up moving away from Orlando, and there was and I think like over the few months that we were hanging out, like we became pretty good friends. And when she found out that she was taking a job elsewhere and was leaving, there was just going to be this like going away party for her. And I had basically like kind of distanced myself from her because it was so hard to be around her, because I couldn't, like, I really tried to make the like friendship aspect of it work, but I have a hard time doing that. And honestly, if people are able to pull that off, God bless them, but I'm just not one of those people, and I really wish I was. But it's like, well, if this, because I don't know, I have this idea of like, okay, eventually, God willing, I get married, and then it's like, at that point, any female friend that I had in my life prior to that, unless they're mutual friends with my wife, it's almost inappropriate to continue the friendship in my mind. So it's like, well, okay, well, let me just cut this off now, as opposed to toying around with the friendship and whatever, when I know that like I'm not gonna end up marrying this person. So why continue to build the friendship up only to then tear it down later on in life when it may hurt even more to have to let that person go. So with this, like, she was having this going away party, really wanted me to be there, and I basically explained myself to her a couple times of like, I just can't do it. I really try to, when I'm around you, to be the person you want me to be, but I just can't. I can't. Like, when I'm around you, it just brings me nothing but pain and grief, and I think about like, and I don't fault her for it. It's just sort of my internalized emotion that was brought about when it happened, that was like, I don't want to continue to put myself in that situation, so I need to just kind of basically stop being friends with you. And so I told her, I'm like, and I told her all that. She's like, well, like, I'm not like letting you off the hook that easily. She's like, I still want to be friends and all that stuff, and I'm still going to be in your life, whatever. And I was like, I mean, okay, you can try, but ultimately it's like you're also moving away at that point too, so that would be just tough to figure that out logistically anyway. So I was like, I'm not coming to the coming or the going away party. And she was like, okay, you're making a big mistake, and not in like a threatening way, but just like I may regret this later. And honestly, I haven't. I'm like really glad I didn't go. I'm really glad I just sort of ended that. But that was where the anger tied in, was like, I am sad at what you've done to me, but there's also anger built into what you've done to me, that once that, like I said earlier, like, I want you to feel how you made me feel. I want you to know that there is nothing left between us. And I want you to be at your going away party knowing I'm not there, and knowing that it's your fault, even though it's not her fault. That's so there. It's like, it is unhealthy, but it's petty too. But that's just sort of how it would typically manifest in a situation like that, and specifically with this one.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's definitely a lot there. So I mean, definitely respect where it's coming from. How you said how are you feeling about it now? Like, where are you at with that process of either forgiveness or moving on?
It's tough because I don't think I've fully moved on, because I still think about her, but like, I've deleted her from like all social media so that I don't see her. But there might be once in a while I might like pop into her Instagram page and see what's up, but not to like talk. But it's definitely not like 100% gone, but I am very much okay with having discontinued the relationship or the friendship at that point. But I don't really know, like, it's just tough. It's like, I don't know how to. I wish I could just like remove all memory of her, but it's like, that's not realistic. So, and also, well, we're coming up on like 2 weeks, about 2 weeks from now. There was this thing at Universal Studios that she and I got tickets for back in like March, and now like I'm gonna be going to that by myself, because I don't even know. I mean, I literally have not spoken to her since that going away thing, and that was in May or maybe April, something like that. And so we got these tickets for this thing, and it's coming up, and so that's sort of making me think about her of like, I wonder if she's going to show up to that. I want, because she doesn't live in Orlando anymore. So is it? But also, it's like the tickets weren't cheap, and they're not like refundable or transferable. So you kind of, I don't know. So my thought is like, I've been thinking of, as we get closer to that event, is she going to text me to try and like see if I'm going to go to that, to like maybe sort of mend things? Hasn't happened yet. Don't know if it will happen. So there's still a lot left that I'm trying to figure out how to fully heal from it. So
No, I think that definitely makes sense, and I appreciate you being willing to open up about where you're at and kind of what that process is, because I think especially these scenarios, you know, everyone's different. Every person is unique. Every two people that try to relate to each other is unique, whether it's friendship or romance or anything like that. And I think just like one theme in the midst of that we might be able to talk about more broadly is I guess the biblical word would be idolatry, but I guess maybe in common vernacular you could kind of say, you know, ultimate desire, or like a greater desire is
things you're putting on a pedestal.
Yeah, things you're putting on a pedestal. And I think, you know, similar to what I mentioned earlier in this conversation is, you know, and especially I think when it comes to things that make us sad, and we've talked about loss here, like the loss of a grandmother, loss of other people. You know, my dad passed a few years back. Like, that's a whole different flavor of grief and sadness than what you're experiencing, which I think aligns more with you're losing this possible future where you feel happy.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
It's almost like grieving this lost possibility.
Yes.
This lost future. And again, I think what I was talking about earlier is like what gets me, and I think this is somewhat more universal, is like, is my sadness coming from an expectation for the future that I feel like isn't met in my present, that I feel like should be. And it's like I should have arrived. Like you're saying, like, I should have a relationship. Everyone else is getting in relationships. Why don't I have that?
Yeah.
And then the other side of it is there was a piece of my present reality that, for whatever reason, sickness, car accidents, you know, everything else, you know, when someone or something is removed kind of traumatically from your life, or it was part of your present reality and part of your life, and it's taken away from that, you know, I think where we get really sad is the fact that, you know, we have this expectation that things are going to change and continually get better a lot of the times, and then for the good things in our life we have the expectation they're never going to change. Like, it's always going to be with us. Like, and I personally don't think, you know, I think a lot of people you could conceptually think about when your parents pass, but like I don't think you can truly understand what that feels like until it happens, because there's a permanence there. Like, growing up your whole life, oh, these two people are somehow, in some way, they've shaped me, they're part of me, like they're almost kind of this, you know, I don't want to say shadow, but like you're in, like they're invariably part of your life. Whether you even have a good relationship or a bad relationship with them, they have in some way genetically, or even if it's not like a blood parent, if it's, you know, like an adoptive parent, like they've formed you in some way. And when that's taken away, like there's just like huge wrestling with who you are in light of that. And so I don't know, I just think, what do you guys think about that hypothesis of, you know, it's either things that we're hoping for, like there's the desire for things to change in the future that we think will be good, and then there's things that are good now that we fear losing. You know, and of course the Star Wars and film flick in me, just all of this is tied up in the story of Anakin Skywalker.
Yeah.
I could totally make that jump parallel of like the loss and how, like, you know, the anger leads to these different things.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I just want to hear y'all's thoughts on kind of like desire and kind of the expectation of, you know, why do we feel like we are owed, or why do we feel like we deserve certain things or should be spared from certain things, when I think we are all at this point mature and old enough to know that like none of that's guaranteed one way or the other.
You're still kind of thinking, but
Oh, okay. I don't know. There's a lot of selfishness involved in that. Like my thing is, it's like this is my life. It is my only life. Am I really not going to have this very rudimentary part of, I mean, still talking about like dating, am I really not going to have this rudimentary part that like pretty much everyone else gets at some point in their life? And like, why is that being withheld? Why is it somehow once every few years someone comes along that really dangles it in front of me and then takes it away, and then it's like it just builds on the hurt of the past of never having this and then almost having it and then not being able to hold on to it. And I don't know. I guess on the topic of idolatry, it's like I went on this mission trip 7.5 years ago. Oof, that's a long time. That on one of the days, one of the leaders, he and I were sitting down and we wrote. Basically, we're talking about idols in my life, because I was having a really hard time on the mission trip. It was like 6 weeks long in Europe, and so I had never left.
That is a long mission trip.
Yeah, I had never left the country before, never been on a mission trip, so it was like I was completely out of my element. And like midpoint of that trip, I was just like, get me out of here. I want to go home. And so he and I sat down and we're just talking about idols in my life, and he had me write down. He's like, just start, like, what do you love more than Jesus? He's like, just start writing things down. And it was like an embarrassingly long list that I still have to this day. It's in my Bible that I don't have with me right now. But there's so many things that we continue to put on the pedestal that it's like, yeah, all these things will inevitably bring us pain when they are stripped from us, because they were never supposed to be in a position where it could bring us pain, because it's like that's not where our focus is supposed to be. These are supposed to be supplemental parts of life that ultimately, like when you're focused on God, when God is the only thing on your pedestal, then it's like, yeah, you'll still feel sadness and whatnot, but ultimately, if you know what your identity is in, if you don't place your identity in these material things or abstract things that aren't God, like eventually everything fades away. And so when it happens, not if, but when, it's gonna tear you to shreds. And so that's why these idols are terrible. And I can't remember which book. It's in the Old Testament, but it talks about filling broken cisterns with rainwater, and with the hope of like, oh, well, this will be my water source. And it's like, no, the cisterns are broken, you idiot. And you know that it's not going to work.
I know they're broken.
Yeah, it's like this is not going to hold the water. That these are flawed things, and you cannot put your hope in these things that are broken. Like, you need to put your hope in God. But when we just, I mean, there are a lot of idols in my life in this sort of dating thing that, like, I'm 29 years old, and it's like really, I've never been beyond a second date. It's like, if we were alive a couple hundred years ago, I'd be like almost dead at this point. It's like, you don't live that long into your 30s way back in the day. And so it's like, well, frick, it's like, when is this coming? Is it coming? And if it doesn't come, am I okay with that?
It's a good question to ask.
And it's like, okay, not every Christian gets married. It's not God's calling for everyone's life. And I think I tell myself, if it doesn't happen for me, that's fine, because it's like, oh, well, then I can kind of write my own ticket and do whatever with my life. And if I want to move to Texas, well, I can do that. And it's like, I don't have to worry about another person, like, trying to figure out logistics of all that stuff. But it's like, ultimately at this point, like, I'm not actually okay with it, and I need to reconcile that. But largely it's just like, that is a huge idol in my life, and I put it above God, and I don't pursue God in the way that I pursue a potential relationship or like dating apps. It's like, do I spend as much time reading the Bible as I do on like Hinge? No. And it's embarrassing to admit that. But it's a freaking idol, and it sucks.
Yeah. One of my favorite stories, actually my favorite story in the Bible, is Abraham and Isaac.
Yeah.
I think is a perfect picture of idolatry, or putting someone on a pedestal. And for those that don't know the story, Abraham wanted a son, and was promised a son for a long time, and it was one of his wife's handmaidens type deal, servants, that he like tried taking. He was patient in this. He like waited 20-30 years after this, and if that sounds patient to me, waiting 20-30 years before,
Longer than I've been alive.
yeah, taking things into his own hands, and then ends up having a child, just biblically, whatever, that's considered like his own, but not truly, like with his wife. But anyways, all the way up until 100, he finally has his firstborn child to his wife at 100 years old, or 120, something like that.
Yeah, he's up there.
Yeah. And basically, Isaac grows up, and it's something he's longed for his entire life. Now, I couldn't imagine longing for one thing for 100 years. I haven't even lived 30 years. I barely lived 25. That's 4 of my lifetimes. It's crazy. You really put that in perspective. And his deepest desire in that. And then all of a sudden, when Abraham is kind of old, or Isaac's a little older, God calls him to put him on an altar and sacrifice him. And what's crazy is that there is no hesitation in that. And also, he doesn't tell Isaac, hey,
You're
like,
good.
yeah, it's God. He just wants to, like, putting the blame on God, and that he actually takes responsibility and like tying him up and putting him on the altar and that. And he ends up this thing he's wanted and longed for so long in his life, puts him on the altar, and knowing or not knowing if God was going to provide in some way, and he does, and he provides. What is it, a calf or something?
A ram.
Indeed.
A ram, yeah.
A ram caught in the bush.
Yeah. So this idea more so of the idolatry, and also even into tie back to other point, marriage, this idea of like submitting, and even when I hear, I mean, ultimately it's this submissive type lifestyle Christ lived, and Yeah, I think of even going back to the lady friend and like being around her. Can you submit to, uh, in the sense of like putting her or helping her flourish and putting her wants and needs above your own, even if that doesn't mean you're the person standing on the stage at the end of the day. And I think that, yeah, this idea of just submitting is really interesting when it comes to idolatry and like, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of, we'll stop thoughts there.
No,
Kind of,
that was a good train. I appreciate it. Thanks for the ticket to ride.
yeah.
Well, I mean, we could this is something we could talk about this for hours.
And we have more episodes to come.
And yeah, we plan on doing this. But being that this is a quote unquote negative emotion, we want to offer biblical hope as it pertains to sadness for those of you who are dealing with it, and if it's something that's been like really prevalent in your life over the past few weeks, year, or just like this is something you've never really been able to escape from. We want to offer some hope for that. So I've written down 6 points in scripture that talk about sadness, and I mean there's a lot, but if you guys think of anything that isn't on this list, feel free to share. Psalm 34:17-18 says, "The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Psalm 55:22, "Cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken." Deuteronomy 31:8, "The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged." Joel 2:12, "Even now declares the Lord, return to me with all your heart, with fasting and weeping and mourning." Isaiah 53:4-5, "Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed." And Revelation 21:3-4, "And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." So there's, I mean, this is the beauty of the God that Matt, Jeff, and I follow in Jesus, is that I often hear it said, and this is like, I mean, every theologian ever has thought of the idea of like, why does God allow X, Y, Z
Suffering.
Yeah, suffering, pain, death, all this stuff. And it's, and Tim Keller in his book, The Reason for God, by the way, highly recommend, offers the idea of, like, first of all, we will never have the answer to that while we're human beings walking around on earth. It's
okay as a Christian to say, I don't know.
Yeah, because it's great that we serve a God that we don't fully understand. Because if we did, is he worth serving? It's like we fully grasp everything about him, and it's like, well, no, we shouldn't be able to fully grasp. Like, he's way beyond our comprehension, and that's encouraging. But he offers the idea of like, we will never know the answer to that question of why does God allow X, Y, Z to happen. But just because we can't think of what that answer may be doesn't mean that there isn't one. So we can have hope in that. But secondly, that whatever the answer is not because he doesn't care about us. Otherwise, he wouldn't have stepped into his own creation to be born in the same way that we were born as babies, completely helpless, grow up, be a teenager, deal with probably goofy crap like we deal with, but ultimately live the life we were called to live and die the death that we were called to die so that we don't have to. He took on the sufferings, it bore our iniquities, and so it can't be that he's like, oh, let them do their own thing, I don't care. It's like, no, he cares a lot. And it's like, when these things happen, when someone dies, when someone gets cancer, it's not like he's not like, whatever. It can't possibly be that. It has to do with he is willing to be a human being and enter into this and deal with all the things that we've dealt with. He's willing to empathize with us in that manner. So, like, rest assured that there is an answer to the question. We don't know it, but we know it's not that he doesn't care.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
I would say I have maybe some more macro style things, but a lot of things that have given me hope over the years is, like, one, like, threaded completely throughout the Bible is kind of this meta narrative, this greater overarching story, which you're touching on, of, you know, God did create a great world, a good world. Things that he said were good and very good, especially when it came to the creation of mankind. He said it was very good. And we know that at some point this is broken by sin, in the fall in Genesis. And I think from that point forward, you know, that's when we see these things, these pains and sufferings enter the world. And it's really first and foremost because of our own choice. And that's a hard thing to grasp. But in that, God being who he is and being of his nature and character sets forth this plan of redemption, which is all throughout the Bible, culminating in Jesus on the cross. And in that, like, he offers hope. One of my favorite verses is actually Philippians 4:6-7, which says, "Do not be anxious in anything, but by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will be with you in Christ Jesus." And so I just, like I said before, I think kind of my antidote to a lot of my sadness, which is usually rooted in fear of the future or grief of things that have been lost, is to ask for that peace and that mindfulness of, where am I and is God with me? And the answer to that is always yes, which is great. And I think provides me a lot of safety and comfort and security, like to know that he is sovereign over whatever scenario I'm in, as hard as it may be, and that at the end of this story there is, like, restoration coming. And I think a lot of theologians refer to this period as kind of like the now and the not yet, where Christ's work has been accomplished but not completed, because the world has not yet been restored fully, but is being redeemed through the work of the gospel. And I think another thing Tim Keller says is that, you know, our greatest desire as humans is to be known and to be loved. And, you know, I think one of the most wonderful things is that if we put that on other humans, no matter how deeply and intimately we get to know them, even in marriage, kind of being the crowning relationship of intimacy, perhaps, if we put all that on one person, like, they're still going to falter, as wonderful as they are. You could be in the healthiest, most wonderful marriage of all time, and there's still gonna be brokenness present somewhere. But God knows you fully and still loves you fully, completely accepts you. And, like, that's the beauty of what the gospel is and what the gospel offers. So I think when I get too wound up in my head, either thinking about, usually if I look left and right, I just look at my friends and neighbors and say, what do they have that I want? And really, in the reality, what I should do is I should look up and say, what do you have for me? Because that's what I want. I think that there's a lot a lot more that we can find meaning in our day-to-day lives if that's our natural response, rather than looking left and right and saying, what do the people around me have? And because at the end of the day, they deal with this stuff too. No one has a perfect life. No one has it all figured out. No one is perfectly happy all the time. And usually it's the people that look the happiest that oftentimes have some of the deepest wounds. So I think that'll be my closing thought for this evening, is that there is hope, and it's definitely found in the gospel and not in the things of this world.
Well said. I'll keep it brief. Closing thought. We can turn it back to you. Is we worship a God, and God has created emotions. He's a God of emotions. These are things to tap into and to not ignore, and to pay attention to. And I think that one of the things I take refuge in is knowing that Jesus Christ has suffered every type of worldly pain there is, from betrayal to physical pain to public humiliation, you name it. And he can empathize with us. So knowing that he actually lived and went through all these things, and also to a very severe degree, or more severe degree than what we'll ever know, as he experienced that fully, which is kind of crazy to even fathom. But yeah, taking heart in that, and I think that brings peace to me ultimately. But yeah, it's found in Jesus.
So we want to thank you for joining us, but also I can speak for the three of us. Like, we do not pretend to have all the answers. We are here to sort of reflect on, I think, just be vulnerable, which is something that can be hard, especially for guys, especially in a public forum where we're telling us, whoever is listening. But embrace the vulnerability, embrace your inner sad boy. But we are not, do not turn to us for all the answers. We are here to point you to Jesus. All of the answers are found in him. He is where hope lies. And that is, he's at the root of this show. So thank you for joining, and we'll see you next time. Toodles.